This is Tom Fox, and I would like to welcome you to episode 72 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today it is my distinct pleasure to have the GRC pundit, Michael Rasmussen, visit with us on topics relating to GRC. I hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you.
Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox, and I would like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. We are recording this on Thursday, July 26th, where I am extraordinarily happy to report the United States has advanced into the final round of 16, or at least the knockout stage of the World Cup. Although they lost to Germany today, they were able to advance because of what they've done in the first two games. So, great day for USA Soccer, and it's a very good day for the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report and Tom Fox, because I've finally been able to get Michael Rasmussen on. Michael is the GRC pundit, and if you haven't heard him or read him, you need to do so. He comes at certainly a wide variety of topics, but for those in the anti-corruption compliance space, compliance. And he comes at it from a GRC perspective, but more importantly, a technology perspective. It's been my privilege to hear Michael speak several times over the past couple of years, and his insight and breadth and scope of knowledge is something to behold, and really has some insights for the lawyers out there listening like me, who really are not technologically enabled or suited to do this. So with that, Michael, I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us today.
It's my pleasure, Tom. It's just wonderful to be on your show.
Thank you very much. Michael, could you introduce really, or tell the folks how you got to be the GRC pundit and kind of your journey to GRC?
Would it be a journey or more wandering? My first pass through college was actually theology. But anyways, I guess I've been in the GRC world for, 22, 23 years now. Yeah, time flies. The first decade I focused a lot on information security, had a stint at manufacturing and healthcare, and then from there, I led an information security consulting practice in the Chicago and Milwaukee markets. About the year 2000, though, I started to transition. I got hired by Giga Information Group, which shortly thereafter got acquired by Forrester Research, as a market research analyst. And my research specialty started off more on the policy and compliance side of information security, but quickly branched out into corporate compliance and ethics, audit, other areas of enterprise and operational risk. And I guess my claim to fame is February 2002, I defined and modeled a market and labeled it GRC. And have spent 7 years at Forrester, and now I've spent 7 years on my own as an independent analyst, researching and benchmarking what companies are doing and how they're using technology to solve complicated governance, risk management, and compliance challenges.
Michael, there were about three things I wanted to visit with you today on. The first is the 2014 GRC Technology Innovation Awards. The second is a blog post that I have to say really caught my eye, and I've heard you talk about it and articulate on it, which is you call the blog post Inevitable Failure, but it's really a disconnect between risk and policy management. And then maybe if we have some time, end up with what you think are 5 key takeaways from the OSEG 2014 Technology Strategy Survey. So maybe we could start with the 2014 GRC Technology Innovation Awards, and you could explain what they are and how companies got there. And are there any things that really stand out in your mind from that list this year?
Certainly. Now, there's a number of recipients, and it'd be hard for me to mention one recipient without mentioning others. So maybe I'll try to avoid specific companies because I don't want to give one more airtime than another when all of them, have done very well. But I actually do 2 award processes every year. The one that is announced in January, February of each year, and we've done it for 3 years in a row now, is the Innovation Award. So that's looking for what's new in technology that related to governance, risk management, and compliance. So what's really plowing new ground and going in new directions where technology's never gone before for GRC. So that's sort of the cutting edge, bleeding edge. Some of it, not all the kinks are worked out yet, but hey, it's really interesting and intriguing. The other award process I do in the middle of the year, and the one I'm in right now, is the Value Awards. That's for more mature and established technology that's been able to be implemented and has returned value to organizations over a period of time. But Tom, you're talking specifically about the innovation awards, and this last year, the ones I announced in February. There was, a good, I can't remember the exact number. There it is. I'm sorry, I have my sheet up in front of me. 62 applicants that had submitted technologies, and I selected 15 to receive awards of those 62. Generally, the awards were given out, and we could sort of group things into categories. One was GRC engagement. And that's been a big theme of my research in the last 2 years, is that GRC is not just for the back office. It's not just for, legal and corporate compliance and security and finance and risk and audit, but it's for the front lines of the organization. The Brits have this wonderful term called the coal face. And what they mean by that is, it comes from the Welsh miners chipping away at the coal way down deep in the mines. And they use it in the annotation that every organization's got a coal face. Whether it's the bank and you have the teller at the bank, or the nurse in the healthcare environment, or even the janitor in the healthcare environment, it could be anybody. We all have coal faces, every one of our businesses. And GRC engagement is, how do we use technology to communicate things like policies and training and conduct assessments and get people to report issues and engage employees wherever they're at, and create interfaces that are very interactive and engaging. On the policy and training side, we see a lot of things like gamification and things. And, I can go through different types of training and get my little, anti-bribery and corruption merit badge type thing on my corporate avatar, because I've done the training and have answered a series of questions and I've read the policies and attested and taken all these steps. Sort of like the Boy Scout merit badge stash, that we can start collecting all these. That's like gamification. It's a way of engaging employees. The other area we saw a lot of nominations and recognized people for was regulatory change management. Organizations are up against a lot of regulatory change across industries, some more than others. The financial services, banking, 2008, there were 8,704 changes to laws, rules, regulations, enforcement actions, administrative decisions, and such impacting banks globally. Over half of those are from the U.S. 2012 was 17,763 changes. In those 5 years, we doubled the amount of change in we doubled the amount of regulatory change just upon banks. And I understand that we're trending towards 20,000 or more this year of changes. Significant changes on banking, but also on insurance, on healthcare. There's a lot of regulatory change out there. And so there's some very intriguing solutions we recognized that, help integrate content and develop processes for managing regulatory change within the environment. The third area that got recognized was a lot of GRC analytics and reporting. How can we integrate different data sets and sources? Like in your world of anti-bribery and corruption, for instance, we might want to be able to look at who are the master records of who our agents and vendors, suppliers are in different parts of the world, be able to break them out in different parts of the world, look at the transactions that we've had with those relationships. We might also want to tie in politically exposed person, like watch lists and things, external data sources, to be able to integrate and analyze together a lot of different data sets, both internal to the organization and external. So GRC analytics and reporting. And the other area where I saw a lot of nominations that we recognized was the cloud, GRC cloud. The software as a service world is really starting to take GRC strongly. One of the things you want to talk about is the OSEG survey that we did. But right now, doing some rounding, because the figures aren't exact, but 1/3 of organizations strongly prefer software as a service or cloud technologies for GRC. Another third on the other side, with a little bit more higher percentage, so that the trend is more towards the SaaS side if you look over the years. But that other third is saying we want more traditional on-premise software, and the third in the middle says we can go either way. So that's roughly how the world's divided up right now. But a few years ago, it was only about 10% that was strongly preferring SaaS, and so big growth in cloud. And what's really interesting is a lot of times, security gets in and some organizations, and particularly in some industries, and says, we can't have cloud. And all the security issues. And those same organizations, their board reporting and calendaring and scheduling and board voting is in the cloud. A lot of them might even have their legal and matter management systems in the cloud, while IT security is like hindering cloud deployments for other parts of the business. So some of the most business sensitive data is already in the cloud for some of these organizations, but we're seeing a lot of growth in GRC cloud technologies, and we recognize some there too.
I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this evolves and see if they move to some of your value awards or other recognition. But from my perspective, it's certainly an exciting time. And as a lawyer, being able to listen to someone like yourself, read the reports, read the awards, read the information that you put out just on a phenomenal basis is helpful to the legal and compliance community.
Well, thank you.
So with that, I'd like to turn a focus to a blog post that you wrote that really struck with me, and it's entitled "Inevitable Failure: Disconnect of Policy, Risk and Policy Management." As I mentioned, I've heard you speak a couple of times, and you really hone in on the disconnect and where companies really have the information, or but don't realize it, or they don't ask the right questions. But this blog post, I thought, really articulated and put it all together in one place for your readership or anyone else that needs this information. Could you talk about what you see as the problem and what perhaps you see as the solution?
The problem is right now we've got, policy management in general is a huge problem for a lot of organizations because, it's scattered. I'm dealing with organizations that have, rogue policies out there. Any manager can open up, Microsoft Word or whatever word processor and create a document and call it a policy. And therefore potentially putting a duty of care upon the organization if it's understood to be a policy, and it could be used against them. So organizations are dealing with rogue policies. Another type of rogue policy is where one part of the organization says, well, that policy is not good enough for us, or, we need something different. And in one financial services organization I interviewed, they said that they had an anti-money laundering policy, but one of their divisions thought it wasn't good enough. They cut out the pieces they didn't like and called it the anti-money laundering policy. So we're dealing with a lot of rogue policies. We have out-of-date policies that have no owner. And so a lot of challenges in just policy management in general. But one of the challenges is the relationship to risk. If you think about it, every policy in the environment is a risk document. We wouldn't have a policy if there wasn't a risk that some individual or process or transaction or relationship was going to behave in a way we didn't want it to. We want consistent operations, we want consistent transactions, we want consistent behavior. Therefore, we write a policy. And so policies are risk documents because we're addressing a risk around behavior. We want to guide what behavior is there. Whether it's a health and safety policy, there's a health and safety risk. Whether it's an HR policy, there's an HR risk. Whether it's an IT security policy, there's a security risk. Whether it's a bribery and corruption policy like gifts and entertainment, there's a gift and entertainment risk. Now, a lot of times, we have never done the effort to take what our risk taxonomy, how we've defined our organizational risks, because enterprise risk management or operational risk management is doing that, from the different parts of the organization writing policies and connect these two together. And as the risk changes, how does that mean our policy should change? We need to make sure that we integrate policy management with risk management because policies address and treat risk. They're a mitigating factor to reduce risk exposure.
I've read several articles that Carol Switzer has written in Compliance Week, and she often calls upon yourself or quotes from you. And the one thing that's really struck me is how you all consistently talk about risk, and specifically you use that word. And what struck me about it is if you talk to a businessman or a business unit or the business person about risk, they understand risk and they understand what that means. But you're able to connect the disparate sources of risk management that they're not thinking about. And I guess that's what this article said to me, and having had the privilege of hearing you speak, you talk about how do you manage that risk and explain to the senior executive policy management is another form or another tool you have for risk management.
That's definitely correct. And so that's what we're talking about, like integrated information environments, so that as risk changes, we can see what policies change. When you have incidents and issues in your environment, so there's some type of misbehavior happening out there, like a gift entertainment violation or health and safety, whatever it might be, we might have a hotline investigation report. So when we have that investigation, what policies were violated? But then also, that's a materialization of risk. and being able to count how many times we've had that over a period of time, that materialization can tell us frequency of risk and impact of risk, as if we're calculating the impact on the organization. All this information relates between risk, sorry, my dog is barking, between risk and policy out there in the environment. And so we need to be able to show the integration and relationship of risk information, incidents, issues, investigations, policies, controls, because all this information brings knowledge to the organization.
Do you find that message of integrating risk is starting to gain traction, or gaining more traction with the executives or other people you work with in management?
Certainly, yeah. Well, I'm seeing it grow significantly. There's still, at times a large educational component on just all the pieces that can come together to build this out.
Now I'd like to turn to, you mentioned OSEG, and I'd like to turn to the 2014 GRC Technology Strategy Survey. And I guess Carol, or I should say OSEG, released that. And as part of that, it had, I think, your 5 key takeaways.
Yeah.
I wrote those down, so if I could just read them, and I would just ask you to kind of go through and explain what you thought the 5 key takeaways. And I wrote them down as following. Number 1, tone down and control spreadsheets, documents, and emails. Number 2, understand GRC is more than one technology. I really love that one. Number 3, define your GRC architecture strategy. Number 4, keep up with change. And number 5, deliver GRC engagement through initiative and easy-to-use technology. Could you just walk us through those?
Certainly. So I chair the OSEG GRC Solutions Council and led the project to draft the survey, and I wrote the report on the survey as part of that exercise. We had 273 respondents from organizations using technology, not selling technology, but 273 responses from organizations using technology for GRC. And they were across roles of risk and compliance, were our top 2 roles, in audit there as well. Together, those make the top 3 roles that responded to the survey. And it's across industries as well. That first one's very important, tone down and control spreadsheets, documents, and email. Right now, we're not going to get rid of them. They're useful tools. We have to understand their limitations and context. Over half the organizations reported, just over half, that their primary GRC technology is documents, spreadsheets, and emails. But they also had mentioned that significant misalignment and not getting value out of it because they're taxed. One financial services firm I interviewed told me that 80% of their staff resources for risk and compliance areas were nothing more than document reconcilers. They were literally dealing with thousands of documents, emails, and spreadsheets and trying to bring all this back in and build risk and compliance reports. And it just was getting them nowhere. And I've heard a lot of organizations say, yeah, that's me, that's us. You just described us. On top of that, documents, spreadsheets, and emails lack non-repudiation. From a lawyer legal standpoint, we can't go back and state that person answered that compliance assessment on that date and time and come back 3 weeks later and change their answer to get themselves out of trouble or the organization out of trouble. There's no audit trail around them. And the regulators are starting to wise up to that a little bit. And so documents, spreadsheets, and emails, while useful, aren't the backbone of GRC. We shouldn't be really sending surveys and assessments and things out that way. There's better technology for that with structured change control features and audit trails around there, so we know who did what, when, how, and why, as well as significant efficiency and reduced reporting times and things like that, because we don't have to consolidate all this information. So, we were not saying eliminate them, we're saying tone down and control, basically appropriately use documents, spreadsheets, and emails, and know their limitations, and make sure you don't overuse them.
Great advice. On your second point on understanding GRC is more than one technology.
Yeah, this one's a very much a point of pain to me. I guess some of it I've caused because I do market research. So I define and model the GRC technology market. When I was at Forrester, I wrote the first 2 Forrester GRC waves. I don't take any credit for the waves written after I left, of course. But I wrote the first 2, and so a lot of people have locked in their mind that there's this GRC platform, and there can be this core platform. But, it really bothers me when I have somebody call me and says, we just bought GRC. Now can you come and tell us what to do with it? You don't buy GRC. GRC is something the organization does, not buys. And I think that's a big misconception. From my point of view, every organization does GRC already.
Right.
That they have some approach to governance, risk management, and compliance happening. It's more about how mature they are. And you can't go out and just buy technology and think, oh, now we got GRC. Because there's a whole element of internal thinking and strategy and process that needs to be built around that. And so GRC itself should be seen as more of an architecture, which gets into the next one, and not just one technology because there's no one technology that solves all of your GRC needs. There isn't.
Much like the compliance world, you don't go and buy compliance off the shelf. So,
Exactly.
But let's move to your next point of defining your GRC architecture strategy.
So, organizations, and we talked to them and asked them about where they were headed, and a big percentage said that we really are trying to build cross-department GRC strategies, but we want best-of-breed solutions where they make sense. And so that gets into GRC architecture. It builds on that point number 2, that GRC is more than one technology, because we need to understand what our needs are and our information technology needs, and what are the different components that we build out. Some of it we might already have internally, some we have to buy, and to build a GRC architecture. Because this one department here might have very specific needs for health and safety that other departments do not have, and they have very special tools and solutions to address risk in that way that they need there. Now, if we just force fit one GRC platform on everybody, we're going to have them all manage risk to the lowest common denominator then. And departments are going to lose value that way. And so we need to think, how do we allow flexibility and autonomy where needed in different departments, but integrated, federated flexibility for reporting and integration throughout the rest of the organization. And so that's where we need to think about GRC architecture. And when we talk about architecture, there's decentralized architecture where different groups do different things in their own way. To me, that fails. That's what I call anarchy. There's completely centralized architecture, which would be more of a monarchy model. We create a chief GRC officer, and we don't want that either, because there's proper balance. That sometimes when you've been in this debate as well, but when compliance reports outside of legal, there's been a big push there because when compliance reports into legal, there can be a conflict of interest at times. Now, I've seen lots of compliance departments work very well within legal, so it doesn't happen all the time. But there's an argument where compliance should report outside because that provides proper balance. Audit shouldn't be managing GRC because audit is that independent, objective, assured. Now, if audit is defining and managing GRC and it comes in and provides assurance on GRC, you've got the fox guarding the hen house. It doesn't work right. So that centralized architecture where we try to create everything to one area and force everybody to the lowest common denominator loses pieces. And so the right approach for an architecture is that federated strategy where we have some centralization and integration, but we allow different departments to do the things that they need in their own way and sometimes use different solutions and be able to integrate that information.
Which, as I recall, was the topic of one of your recent articles on a federated GRC solution in Compliance Week. So, yes. Now, another one clearly near and dear to my heart is keeping up with change. I would say your program has to evolve, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, so please, what did you mean by that?
To me, this is one of the biggest GRC challenges organizations face. They face regulatory change. I already mentioned some stats earlier in the interview on, the amount of change happening in banking, but insurance, healthcare, whether it's new laws, notice of proposed rulemaking, enforcement actions, administrative decisions and rulings. There's lots of regulatory change happening out there, whether within industries or cross industries, like employment labor laws across the 50 different states. There's thousands of them. How do we keep up with that? So there's legal and regulatory change, but there's also risk change. There's change to commodity risk prices and the availability of commodities. There's changes to market risks like foreign exchange risks and things. There's geopolitical risk environment as we do business around the world and operations and how that impacts our organization. There's industry risks and society and technology risks. All those change and bear down on the organization. But on top of that, the business is changing. And so we have changing employees. New ones come in, they change roles, they exit the organization. When they change roles, they came in, were they aware of policies? Are they trained properly? Do they know how to conduct themselves? IT systems change. But even when they don't change, our risk changes because we were fully secure a week ago, but then some hacker somewhere finds some vulnerability and all of a sudden there's a patch. And even though our IT system hasn't changed, our risk postures change. We got to patch things. Our strategy and processes change. Mergers and acquisitions, what happens? Completely redundant set of policies, controls, processes with those mergers and acquisitions. I know one healthcare organization that has over 18,000 policies and procedure documents across 20-some different hospitals they've acquired over the last couple decades. And now they're trying to integrate and consolidate all those. But on top of that, what really is interesting about this is not only is your business changing so much, but your third parties are changing.
Right.
Well, you can't even define who's an insider anymore. Half of what we might define an insider aren't traditional employees because we've got agents and contractors and consultants and temporary workers and outsourcers and service providers and vendors and suppliers. And the organization is this mesh of a maze out there. And not only is my organization changing, but all these third parties, each and every one of their organizations is changing, and their change brings exposure to my organization. I mean, you look at the Target disaster with the credit card fraud. I've had to replace 3 different cards because of that compromise of credit cards at Target point of sale systems in 2013. And you look at that, and it was an HVAC vendor, an air conditioning vendor. Led to the biggest breach of point of sale systems and credit card numbers to date. It was my relationship with an air conditioning vendor that did that.
Right.
That's the complicated nature of business today, and how even all these changes itself can introduce vulnerability and exposure and risk.
And now your point number 5, or key takeaway number 5, delivering GRC engagement through initiative and easy-to-use technology.
Actually intuitive. And so there's lots of GRC technology out there. I've cataloged over 500 different types of, different vendors and providers of GRC technology. Some of these systems, have very dated interfaces. They look like they are built 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and they haven't been changed since. Some not as dated. Their interface design and experiences only, goes back maybe 5 years ago. But there's some really interesting technologies. And one of the things that the survey itself brought out was that the number 1 criteria, in the past it was number 2, and it moved to the number 1 buying criteria for GRC technology going forward was ease of use. I mean, how easy is it for not only GRC professionals, but the end users throughout my environment to use and engage?
Right.
Because that becomes critical, because GRC just doesn't happen in the back office. It happens in the front office as well.
Right. Michael, we're at the end of our time, but I wondered if you could tell our listeners your website location, and then if they had any questions, would they be able to contact you via email?
Certainly. My website's www.grc2020.com, grc2020.com. My email address is mkras@grc2020.com, and I look forward to interactions.
And I would say I Googled you just with GRC Pundit, so if people can't remember your site, if they'll Google that, they will certainly get to you. Michael, I can't tell you enough I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. This has been great, and I look forward to visiting with you again.
Likewise, Tom.